Hey everybody, it is Jordan here at Wednesday Night Warhammer with another weekly Tyranids Tactics video. This week, we're talking about all the big bugs, only the big bugs. The Stampede in one, the Crusher Stampede. The detachment rule for all of these big bugs is called Enrage Behemoths. They're angry, they're stampeded, they're enraged, and they get +2 to their OC if they're at starting strength. A little bit of a help to offset the low unit count for the detachment in itself. If they get damaged at all, below starting strength, they're going to get +1 to hit. It's going to be really nice because it does actually counteract any monsters that are bracketing, and also Maleceptors and Exocrines hitting on 2s. Sheesh, that's pretty good. And then if your monsters get a little bit too beat up, if they're below half starting strength, and they all of a sudden get +1 to wound anything they're activating into. Some very strong buffs if you get it going, and then the change to being able to have +2 to OC means no matter what state your monsters are in, they are getting some kind of benefit if they are in this detachment. Going through our enhancements, short end, they're pretty bad, but we're gonna go through them anyways because I would feel weird if I didn't list them in the deep dive of the tactics video regardless. First one we got is Ominous Presence. Basically, it's gonna give an extra 3 to your OC to your monster. Some people were doing like a cute trick with the Neuro Tyrant, and you do a bunch of Neurogons, and then you have like OC 50 or something with that squad. That's cool. Yes, and then it's 15 points, so that's whatever. Enrage reserves, monster model only, of course, like all of these, I think. If you fight on death on a 3-up, that's okay. I think it is kind of all right, but honestly, my monster character dying is something that I'm not really excited about, and it's not really something that I'm going to have planned into my normal gameplay, especially with Crusher Stampede. Last two enhancements that you're going to be super excited about, and I'm sure you will always use, is definitely the one that takes the cake, is Null Nodules. It's monster model only, and you get a Feel No Pain against psychic attacks once per game. It's terrible. Honestly, that's probably the worst enhancement that I have read. If you think there is a worse enhancement, please tell me in the comments, and I'd love to see that. But this is terrible. It is a terrible enhancement. I know it's only 10 points, but find something else to do 10 points on. Then last but not least, probably the one enhancement that might be worth taking is Monstrous Nemesis. Again, it's a monster model only, and you just get +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. I think that's pretty good. However, for 25 points, I think that might be a little bit steep, but in some matchups, in some cases, even with our buffs, Tyranid strengths don't go into monsters and vehicles all amazingly. So honestly, maybe having like a Hive Tyrant that has this could be cool if you have the space for the points. But none of these enhancements I'm really excited about, or I'm really concerned about fitting into any of my Crusher Stampede lists. Here is where we actually get cooking, is the stratagems. The stratagems are actually pretty strong in Crusher Stampede, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of lists are taking the Swarm Lord to have even more access to these cool stratagems. But we can talk about him a little bit later. First one we got is Corrosive Viscera. I think I'm saying that right. If I'm not, I don't know. That's fine. Just after one of your monsters dies, which is very sad, you don't roll for a deadly demise, you just auto explode, and it's just 1 CP. That could be very strong. Some of our bigger monsters like Norn Emissaries and the like have really big deadly demises. So if your opponent is just stacking multiple units to try and kill your one big monster, it could be a good time to just auto explode, and then boom, you just take out little bits of units here and there, everything within 6 inches. In addition, if you have a smaller monster that is just deadly demise 1, this is also a pretty interesting stratagem to use if your opponent kills it next to like an Exocrine or like a Maleceptor that isn't already wounded. You could technically do that and then auto wound on yourself, and then you would proc that +1 to hit buff that the detachment gives you. So then all of a sudden, without really risking too much for those monsters, they're going to be hitting on 2s because your opponent was goofy enough to kill your Psychophage or whatever that is right next to him. Could be something to think about. Next one is Rampaging Monstrosities. You will use this one a lot. One monster rerolls all hits in the fight phase. 1 CP. Very, very simple. Just boom, 1 CP. I'm going to reroll all my hits against you, and your opponent's going to be sad. I love stratagems like this. There's no like hoops to jump through. There's no like different conditions or whatever. It's just 1 CP. Your good unit gets better, which that's awesome. I love it. Speaking of stratagems where you have to jump through hoops, it's Savage Roar. After your monster unit was selected as an attack in the fight phase, specifically, your enemy unit then takes a battle shock test. Then they are -1 to hit, regardless if they failed the battle shock test, and then they are -1 to wound if they do fail the battle shock test. It's 1 CP. I think this is pretty good. I think you are definitely going to kind of cherry pick what units you use this on. I would not be excited about activating this into Space Marines a whole lot, or any other faction that has just like a 6-up leadership all the time. I think definitely Orcs and Necrons could be good targets with that. The -1 to hit is pretty good, and then the -1 to wound is even better, and then the battle shock is super, super good, because then they can't do any further stratagem support after they activate. Last 3 of our stratagems, and honestly I think these are the best ones. The ones before were pretty good as well, but Untrammeled Ferocity, this is pretty much the stratagem, in my opinion, that really has put Crusher Stampede back kind of in the forefront of competitive play. Maybe not back, maybe to start being competitive as a detachment. Basically, your monsters can go ghost. They can go through walls if they are 4 inches or higher, and they can also move over, different enemy units and stuff. But really, the thing is they can move through walls. But after they move, you roll a d6. On a 1, they are battle shocked. It's kind of weird that they don't say take a battle shock chest and then but it's whatever. It's the same Imperial Knight, Chaos Knight rule that they have. We just have to pay a CP for it, which is okay. But I think it really, really does help this detachment kind of get places, and it allows for you to play around move blocks and play around different terrains, which really, really, really has helped the detachment, I think, more than a lot of people expected, me included. The next one, I really, really love this stratagem as well, is Swarm Guided Salvos. Monster shooting gets to ignore cover and negative hit modifiers. Basically, it says your opponent's smoke screen can just, eat dirt. This is really good with Maleceptors, because the bane of Maleceptors is their AP2, but cover is really bad with Maleceptors, because AP2 going down to AP1 is very, very tough. And then especially if you're playing against like Space Marines or something, then they put Armor of Contempt on it, then any of your opponent's units get to just roll 3-ups and then have a great day. However, with this, you ignore cover. So it basically is an additional bonus to your AP, and it really helps because that's basically just +1 AP. In 10th edition, everybody gets cover all the time. And then the ignore negative ballistic skill and hit modifiers is just kind of like icing on top. This isn't going to come up all of the time, but it is definitely an additional bonus. It's pretty good. It's really good, like smoke screen deterrent, because it just basically says that stratagem does nothing, which is awesome. Then last but not least is a strat that I wish we had everywhere, is Massive Impact. After your monster unit finished a charge, roll 66 on a 4-up. Enemy unit with engagement range takes a mortal for each of those 4-ups. It's basically a grenade strat. It's basically kind of a tank shock, but it's locked to a detachment with Tyranids. So I am kind of sad that all Tyranids don't get this, but also I'm not going to complain that we have a detachment that has it, because this is pretty good. This is good for maybe clearing out some screens or some smaller things that are, if you're multi-charging something, some smaller things that are in the way of your main target. It might allow for easier pile-in, or it might just clear up something that you don't want to devote your attacks into. I also think it's good that it isn't dependent on your toughness or your strength. It is kind of a detriment that we only roll 66. However, I think it is good that any monster, no matter how good their melee is, can benefit from this pretty good strat. All right, why is Crusher Stampede quote unquote good right now? Why are people playing it more often? Why is it doing better in tournaments? I think the 2 main things is the change in the balanced data slate. The first one is, we already talked about this before, before, but Untrammeled Ferocity. The ability for your monsters to just kind of get where they need to be is incredibly strong, and it definitely it takes away the worst part about playing just monsters. You can move through stuff, and it's not a huge deal. Yes, you might get battle shocked, but it definitely allows for lines of sight that weren't there before, especially with like Tyran Effects with such a big gun. You can just move through a wall, and then all of a sudden your field of vision is way better. Then in addition, like your Swarm Lord, he can just move through walls as well. It's just 1 CP to get him somewhere he needs to be, which I think is very, very strong. And it also helps for, just literally moving around. Moving through your opponent's units as well is nice. The move blocking opportunities that your opponent has against Crusher Stampede are severely limited now just because of this one stratagem. Now, they are still able to, if they block 3 or 4 monsters all at once, yes, you're only getting 1 in, but then, they're having to spend so many resources to try and keep your army away from them. The next one is the Enraged Behemoth change. Basically, you just get more OC when you exist. You don't have to really benefit from the detachment only if you are hurt, which I think was kind of a misnomer from the start. It's not supposed to be, I feel like detachment rules should gain benefit to all units all the time. And it was kind of weird that Crusher Stampede, you only get your detachment if your unit is hurt. It doesn't really make sense. And I think something really cool, I know this is a monologue, not a Trigon, sorry, but when your Trigon comes in now, I believe he's OC 5, which is a really good breaking point. So something cool you can do, I see a lot of lists that are running 1 singleton Trigon. You could just, have him come in on a objective that your opponent is contesting, and he's OC 5. A lot of just, MSU units are also OC 5. So your Trigon comes in, it cancels out the objective, and then it hurts your opponent's primary in the next turn, and then they also have to deal with a Trigon. So that's a little cool trick that you can do with it. One more thing that I didn't post in here in one of the text boxes is I feel like our meta right now is kind of leaning towards some skews. I think there's a lot of heavy armor. There's a lot of vehicle, spam stuff. And, Crusher Stampede also leans into that too with the amount of monsters that you put in. But I also think the anti-armor that Crusher Stampede provides with the Tyran Effects and other big guns also is in a good place to combat that. I also think another good archetype that is in the meta right now is kind of askew is a lot of swarm lists or a lot of MSU kind of infantry list. If they're going to have a hard time coming against all of this T10, T11, and T12 monsters. And so if you can just stat check them with that high toughness and good armor save, then it's going to be a tough time for them. And probably some might even argue an even better change to Crusher Stampede is they've subscribed to WNW. This makes they get access to fun and competitive live streams every Wednesday. We always try to put the most competitive list on the table, and then sometimes we do some fun twists with those. With that, we are also doing some cool and free giveaways. I think almost every other month right now, we're giving away something cool. We're giving away a World Leaders Combat Patrol box right now as we speak, and you can go check out our Discord for that. Make sure you subscribe here. That would be wonderful. And then last but certainly not least, like this video that you are watching right now. We're doing weekly tactics videos. They're almost always Tyranids because that's the army that I like to play the most. So if you are interested and you have gotten this far into this video, consider joining Crusher Stampede and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as commenting what kind of videos you want to see next and giving them a like if you're enjoying this content. All right, back to the monsters. So we touched on a couple of these topics before throughout the video just because of the nature of Crusher Stampede, but really thinking about the strengths of Crusher Stampede is first up, it is a skew army. If you are bringing 8 monsters, which I think a lot of lists are bringing around 8 monsters, your opponent might be able to kill 1 monster a turn, 2 monsters a turn, depending on their, their makeup of their army. But if they're activating their entire army into 1 or 2 monsters, and that means you have a really good chance of a strong counterattack, and then you can just go in there. And in addition, there are some armies that are struggle into monsters, and they might pour their entire army into your Tyran Effects, and then they still don't kill it. So then they have committed so many units to try and kill one thing, and then the rest of your army can go and look at it and just nuke it from afar, which is really, really good. It's the danger of skew armies where if you have a good matchup, then you're just going to steamroll them. It is also kind of the little bit of a danger of, with a skew army with so many monsters, you also have the possibility of going into an opposite skew. Like if you're running into a list that can just absolutely destroy monsters, you could have a tough time. However, Tyranids, I think, and Crusher Stampede kind of have a good way of balancing that, because our scoring units are so cheaply pointed. You can really, really, really still have so many monsters and then still have a plethora of scoring units to offset kind of that imbalance. Next up, our Tyranid monsters are incredibly efficient. I think they are appropriately pointed. Some would argue that some of our monsters are a little bit too cheap, but they do a really good job at what they're trying to do. They want to be at a place and then activate offensively and then stick around, hopefully, your next turn. You got your Tyran Effects, who is at 190, which I think, GW, please do not change how many points it is, but it's at 190, which I think is a very fair cost for all of its defense. And then it's very strong weapons. You have the Maliceptor, who's also at 170, basically been the entire edition at 170, who has a very good gun with multiple very strong abilities, and it's really good as well. And then you stack it with like things like Exocrine and Hive Tyrants and everything, and all of a sudden you get all of these units that kind of just work together really, really well for very reasonable cost. And then in Crusher Stampede, the buffs are very subtle, like the +1 to hit, the plus to OC, and then finally the +1 to wound. They all seem subtle and very simple, but when you start stacking those with multiple monsters, your opponent is really going to feel that hurt, because they all start to work together very strongly, even when the buffs are just so slight. And then last, we've talked about this quite a bit, but with Untrammeled Ferocity, your opponent is going to have a much harder time controlling the board and denying points of the board for where you want to be. So with that extra buff of being able to move around and move through buildings, it has really, really, really helped Crusher Stampede activate in areas of the game where it hasn't in the past. Definitely a unit you should be running in Crusher Stampede right now is the Tyran Effects. Before we get into some other synergies and how I think you should play Crusher Stampede, I wanted to just shine a spotlight on this cute little guy that is not so little. So with Crusher Stampede Puffs really carries the Tyran Effects in a way that it really doesn't, it is not able to benefit in other detachments. Okay, so you get +1 to hit after losing a wound. Now you might say, well, the Rupture Cannon is already heavy, so that's not a huge buff, but I really think it is, because the ability to move around terrain and move to other lines of sight and still be hitting with the Rupture Cannon on a 2-up is just crazy. It is so good, being able to hit with that gun on a 2-up reliably all the time, instead of sticking in one place and hoping that your opponent just walks into your line of sight, is definitely a huge buff. Then it can ignore cover and hit modifiers. Now, if you're using the Rupture Cannon, it's not, sure, cover is not going to do amazing things, but honestly, keeping that AP4 is really, really good, especially into a lot of Space Marine things. I know I'm referencing Space Marines all the time, but honestly, there are a lot in the meta. It's also really good at popping rhinos and stuff, so keeping that rhino at not having a save is kind of disgusting. So I really enjoy Swarm Guided Salvos with the T-Fex. Then let's just talk about its defensive profile. It's T12 2-up monster. That is just right there. That is already disgusting, especially because you're going to be able to get cover almost all of the time, and if you position it right. And then also its ability, you just blanket damage as well. It's really good at allowing for it to trigger the detachment ability of +1 to hit and still stay around. So if your opponent is shooting a bunch of meltas into it, you maybe you slow roll it, save a couple, blank the last one, or maybe they get one through, then odds are your Tyran Effects is not dying after one melta shot or whatever. And then it's able to get the +1 to hit, and it's still around to just go and cause chaos for the next turn. In addition, it's OC7 when it's not wounded, which is kind of crazy. That's kind of crazy to say that it's just going to walk up and take points with OC7, and then they have to commit a good portion of their army to kill this thing so that they can score primary again. And then in the past, I have not liked Tyran Effects and other detachments such as Invasion or Synaptic Nexus, etc. But honestly, when you just put a critical mass of Rupture Cannons on the battlefield, even though I called them Casino Cannons, if you roll enough Rupture Cannons at something, that thing is going to die for sure. This is always my favorite part of the videos, is when we get to go away from the strict rules and then we get to actually talk about some of the synergies and tactics that I think make certain detachments and armies really churn. So for Crusher Stampede, for some synergies that we're looking at, I'm going to be looking at 3 different units that I think are very strong includes in your army. Of course, the Tyran Effects already, but we can't have 2 slides dedicated to the Tyran Effects. First up, we get the Maleceptor. I love the Maleceptor. It's one of my favorite units ever. I played it a lot through 9th edition, and I'm happy that I'm able to play it so much in 10th edition. So one thing that I honestly didn't even mention yet in that box is the first, as soon as the Maleceptor gets wounded at all, it's hitting on 2s in range and in combat. That is ridiculous. It's very strong. It's got a really good gun, and then I can't imagine hitting on 2s all the time. That would be amazing. But the first bullet point that I said is it babysits other large monsters with a -1 to hit aura. If you put a Tyran Effects and a Maleceptor on an objective, that is going to be terrible for your opponent to deal with, because the Tyran Effects is so tanky, and then the Maleceptor makes it even more tanky. So it's either they try to go into just the Tyran Effects, and then they're trying to fight through all of these -1 to hit auras, and the defensiveness of the Tyran Effects itself is just terrible. Or they try and activate into a Maleceptor, which has the same aura, and then it has a 4-up invulnerable save, which is very, very hard to just push through. So I really love that combo, is, have your Maleceptor walk the dog, and Tyran Effects being the dog right there. And then also something, I forgot to mention the strong gun that it has. I think we talked about it a little bit before, but makes really good use off of the salvo stratagem, so that it is ignore and cover, like I talked about before, with that AP2 is kind of a weird spot. So definitely ignore and cover helps it a lot. And then now, lastly, for the Maleceptor, is it buffs other units with the Synapse. This detachment, and at least how I've made a lot of my list, it does have some room for Synapse with Maleceptors, with Swarmlord, which we'll talk about in a second. However, a lot of times your monsters, there's a chance that your monsters are just going to go out on their own and kind of do their own business. So having a Maleceptor around to kind of help them stay in that Synapse with leadership and everything really helps all of their units work efficiently. Next up, the Swarmlord. The stratagems in this detachment are very, very, very strong, and the Swarmlord's ability to just have an additional CP every single turn allows you to use those offensive stratagems a whole lot more, which is very interesting to note. I feel like a lot of Tyranid detachments often use reactive stratagems a whole lot, and I think this is one of the detachments that honestly you're going to be using your CP maybe more often in your turn than you would if you were playing other Tyranid detachments. So I think that is a very strong reason why a lot of people are putting Swarmlord into their list. The change to the Vect aura is just absolutely bonkers. For being able to just have Swarmlord out there in the center of the field, you have to deal with the Tyran Effects, you have to deal with the Maleceptor, and now your stratagems are going to cost 1 more CP because Swarmlord's out there. Amazing. I love it. Throw him in there. And in addition, with Synapse, like I was talking about before, he has 9-inch Synapse instead of 6 inches, and that additional 3 inches definitely counts. It is definitely a very good buff, and if you are able to position a little bit better using that extra 3 inches, then that is a very good for you. Last but not least, I've talked so much about Swarmlord already, and I haven't even mentioned that he has 8 attacks that hit on 2. They're twin length, strength 10, AP2, and 3 damage apiece. The beat stick, he is so good. So he has all those abilities, and then when the going gets tough, the Swarmlord definitely gets going. Last on these synergies of these key data sheets is the Exocrine. Exocrine you're going to take as many as you can in your list. Absolutely. It's just a very efficient gun that does really good things. He's going to give reroll 1s to your T-Fex that is going to be hitting on 2s, of course. You're going to use him to clear some chaff, and maybe that seems like a bad thing to do, but honestly, if you have 2 to 3 exocrines, you're going to want to use them on the chaff to elite infantry so that your rupture cannons can activate into some bigger stuff. The exocrine is just kind of does what it does. It's cheap and doesn't need buffs itself. It's very efficient. If it gets damaged at all, hitting on 2s with that big blast gun really helps it just kill what it wants. When I am bringing Crusher Stampede to the table, it's a whole lot of fun, but it also has some very competitive value. But these are kind of the bullet points that I take into effect to help me play Crusher Stampede to the best possible way. First up is lock the board down. Surely they can't kill all of us, but it's the truth. I feel like Crusher Stampede is one of those armies that does it well, where if you are going to commit to the table and control all the table, you just push everything out there, and your opponent, more likely than not, will not be able to kill all of your units in one go. So it applies this really strong amount of pressure where you can just push up the board and then just keep pushing through the rest of the game, kind of like a stampede. I do want to say, be careful. Don't really expose everything all at once, unless you think this is a good way to start the match or initiate a bunch of trades in a way that benefits you. Next up, the castle. I feel like I could make a video all about this on its own. The Mouse Scepter are stacked with Stormlord. Now, if you put a Mouse Scepter next to Tyran Effects, we spoke about this a little bit before, it's going to get -1 to hit. In addition, if you are able to position your Swarmlord, so it also has its 12-inch Vect Aura in a way where it is by the Mouse Scepter and Tyran Effects, then whatever is activating into the Mouse Scepter is going to get -1 to hit, and its stratagems are going to cost more. And you get to that point, and it's actually really tough for a lot of armies to do what they want to do into your monsters. A lot of armies really depend on just being able to churn out these stratagems to really staple rules onto these units that make them a blender and just kill whatever they want. If you take away -1 to hit, and if you make those offensive stratagems cost an additional CP, then it can be really tough for your opponent to handle that. This third bullet point is probably one of the most important bullet points in this entire video. Absolutely plan and practice your deployment / your first turn movement. Yes, we can move through walls right now. It's very good. 1 CP, get where you want to go, but that's just one monster, and you're probably playing like around 8 monsters or something. All of your other monsters cannot go through those walls. So if you're deploying in a way where your monsters are stuck behind a wall, maybe deploy in a different way, or maybe think about putting a couple of things into strategic reserves. I know I'm probably putting at least 1 exocrine into strategic reserves. I'm running 3 in my Crusher Stampede list, but maybe put an exocrine in strategic reserves. Maybe, of course, your Trigon if you're bringing on, and then maybe consider a Mouse Scepter or Tyran Effects. But I generally do want those on the battlefield. But definitely don't just go onto the battlefield and start deploying without actually taking your time and visualizing where your monsters need to be and where they need to go. For sure. And that kind of goes with our next bullet point: pick a flank and distract the rest. My Crusher Stampede list that I've been running, or that I'm having fun with, does have a good amount of scoring chaff units. I'm a fan of gargoyles, even if they're expensive. So my game plan is I'm going to have this critical mass of monsters on one side, on one area of the table, and then I'm going to have other distracting units, maybe like a Trigon, maybe lictors or gargoyles, to kind of disrupt primary and disrupt the opponent's units that just kind of want to be there and score points. So I'm really going to do my best to force my opponent to commit units to a part of the table that I'm not in, and then really take over the rest of the table with all of my monsters and just have a great time. Target priority: expose only when you need to, or everything at once. All right, so that means basically, if your lictor can go out and take a point, have your lictor go do that. if your, I don't know, your Hormagaunts or Gargoyles or whatever can go out and take a point, do that. If your opponent is in a way where they are not able to activate their entire army into your entire army, then move your entire army and set up just on the table and make your opponent ask the question, can I kill all of these monsters this turn? And if their answer is no, then it's going to set you up for a really, really strong turn. You want to think about it this way. Don't give your opponent exactly what they can chew on. You want to always give them more so that they have to pick and choose with bad decisions, or just give them too little so that they end up having to commit in ways that is very beneficial to you. Last but not least, enough Rupture Cannons kills anything. Okay, so it's critical mass of Rupture Cannons. I often think that it is better, especially with guns like Rupture Cannons, to underestimate their power and be able to have 2 of them activate, or Rupture Cannon and a Maleceptor activate into it instead of just 1. Don't count on the heavy swing of 12 damage. Count on the lower swing of, 7 or 8 damage, and then you'll be golden. Wrapping up this video, first up, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you for listening to all my bug rambles. I really appreciate it. If you're enjoying this content, please consider liking, comment, and subscribing. We're doing this every single week. I'm going to churn out these videos as much as I can with some really good information on different tactics with Tyranids. We're going to eventually get through all of the detachments, and then we'll key in on some different units that I think shine. And it's just going to be a great time with a lot of really good information, I feel like. But back to it, I just want to highlight somebody who used Crusher Stampede and got a first place win at the Pompeii Pillage. They went 4-0-1. This is Adam Merritt. Adam, congrats, dude. Good job on your win. This was August 31st, so pretty recent. So I just want to take a look at his Crusher Stampede list. I think it's very interesting. It has a lot of really cool pieces in it. So he's got Death Leaper and Swarm Lord. Notice no characters to put those great enhancements on, but then he also has Biovore, double Excrin, double Lictor, double Maleceptor, Neurolictor, Squad of Raveners, which I think is very cool, a Trigon, and here's the interesting part. A lot of lists are running triple Rupture Cannon. I think it's really cool that he is running the Acid Spray. So it's kind of like this big, huge Overwatch thread or something that's going to take over the table with a disgusting Flamer, and then following up with 2 T-Fexes with Rupture Cannons. I think I would assume that this list does a lot of the things that I've been talking about, just like a big critical mass of monsters that kind of flood the board with some support pieces that really allow for your monsters to do the heavy lifting, while your Lictors, Neurolictors, Raveners, and even Death Leaper kind of get the job done with your scoring. Notice, still bringing a Biovore, OC rule doesn't matter. We're still taking the Biovore, and Tyranids are still putting up good results. So congrats, Adam. Good job on the win. I think it's awesome. Crusher Stampede is doing so well right now, and really cool list, man. Thank you all again for watching, commenting, subscribing, liking. It's really cool that we're building a Tyranid community here right at Wednesday Night Warhammer. Don't forget to check out our live streams every Wednesday. These tactic videos are pretty cool, but honestly, if you haven't checked out our live streams, come and hang in the chat. It is just a really, really, really good time. As always, thanks again for watching. See you Wednesday.